White House to ask Congress to cut $9 billion in funds, including for NPR, PBS, and USAID. The White House is preparing a recession package that will seek to have Congress claw back more than $9 billion in approved funding through cuts to public broadcasting. The U.S. Agency for International Development, which is known as USAID, an agency's President Trump has sought to eliminate. A White House official confirmed to The Hill that the package will be sent to Congress when lawmakers return from Easter recess, April the 28th. The package requests to eliminate $9.3 billion in spending, the official has said. That includes money for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which oversees PBS and NPR, money for USAID and agencies like the U.S., the Institute of Peace, which Trump also has aimed at. He's aimed at dismantling it via an executive order signed in February recently. So the New York Post, which first reported on the plan request, noted the request covered roughly $1 billion for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and more than $8 billion for USAID and other State Department efforts. The request cites various aspects of funding used by the organization that do not align with the Trump administration priorities. It cites that PBS program from 2022 titled Our League about transgender woman who comes out to members of their bowling league in Ohio. Sorry for being tongue-tied. It's early in the morning and I'm trying to get myself kind of awake, because I'm going to be leaving and then coming back. So I also noticed the last video that I posted, it had like a lot of like a whistling sound, so I had to adjust my mic and my equipment. I'm just being really honest here outside of the article. So this is not really the article that I was looking at, but this is interesting because it goes along with some of the things that I discovered. So I've been following the Trump administration and what they've been doing in the videos that young people have been putting out on YouTube and Instagram and all of the various media sites. And I've been paying attention to some of the people who are influencers and some of the things that they've been saying recently. And so this article was but one of many that I'm discussing this morning, but this is just one of the many that I witnessed. That's what I meant to say. I'm not going to go over every single article, but this is one. But this wasn't the main one that I really wanted to address. But this is important, just like everything else is. The request also notes that NPR CEO Catherine Mayer described Trump as a fascist in the old social media post. So representative for NPR and PBS did not immediately respond to the request for the comment. Representative for NPR and PBS, I guess they see what's going on. A lot of time when they don't respond to requests, they don't want to talk about it because they know that this was coming down the road. There's some other things that are really pressing also that are actually going to come into effect, which is how I believe our poverty level is going to skyrocket by, I say, in the next couple of months. Um, and I don't mean to be the bearer of doom and gloom, but I know from what I've been reading, it isn't going to be an easy road for the black community that depends heavily on a lot of the programs that 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 some people may rely on as a lifeline as well. So it says the recession package also cites numerous examples of funding from the State Department and the U.S. aid to be cut that are not in line with Trump's agenda. Among those which are 500,000 for electric buses in Rwanda, 750,000 for reducing xenophobia in Venezuela, and 3 million for a children development television program that's in Iraq. So this is also hitting other countries as well, which we heard about the tariffs. That's the big talk of reciprocal tariffs that should be coming down the road if it hasn't already. Some of it has already started. So simple majorities in both the House and Senate would need to vote to approve the recession package in order to eliminate the congressional approved funding. Republican control both chambers, though the margin in the House is especially narrow. Trump and his allies have for months targeted funding for public broadcast stations like NPR, which some Republicans have criticized as too liberal with news coverage. So get ready, also social media, because they might also try to target some of those outlets as well if they're doing this on major networks. So leaders of subcommittee hearing in March to defund their practices as well. So it's almost like they're gutting and cutting and also silencing people as well. They're controlling the speech of what comes out of these outlets. So the president has also aggressively pushed to dismantle U.S. aid, claiming it is run by radical lunatics. This is coming from Trump. So the agency sends aid to communities impacted by conflicts that helps disease prevention efforts and assists developing countries. Advocates argue it is critical for the U.S. in establishing influence around the world, while critics assert it is a poor use of government funds. So efforts to gut the U.S. aid have run into various court orders as well. So there are many lawsuits against the Trump administration that are ongoing and some that are pending. So you might hear a little buzzing and a little dinging noise, but that's from a phone. Sorry about that. I rather that noise than the noise that happened the last video I made. It was really annoying, but I was getting the message out there. I could redo the video, but I'm not gonna because there's so much going on. So I'd like to say good morning. This is Antoinette70 back with some political news content of what's going on. Some people already know what's going on. Some people have an idea of what's going on, and those are not clear on what's going on. They just know that there is a lot happening, and it has to do with the White House and the administration that's in place right now. I am now going to try to, you might see me surfing on here. I'm going to try to surf for the information that I was really looking for. I could just tell you what I discovered and what I already knew was coming. It sounds like Trump wants to cut public housing funds, and that's a lifeline for many people who are in lower income brackets or they have health issues. I have to reiterate because, I just, at work, I know some people, when you go to work, you discuss, some coworkers might come up and bring some of these issues, politics up. And within the black community, I've had a few people and colleagues, some say that it's probably a needed thing to cut some of the programs like Section 8 or food stamps and some of the other programs because it is a trap for black people, which is true in some respects. But here's the problem with all of that. You need something to kind of help people get on their 2 feet if they lose their job or if they become ill and have a health issue and they can no longer make the money that they used to make. Um, because a lot of us don't have like large retirement packages and like money that is bequeathed from elders or family members before us that were here because they were themselves in poverty and just barely making it. And we're in a situation where a culture that had a lot happen to people before us that made it so that not all of us were able to acquire a lot of money. Some might have through maybe entertainment, maybe through some good fortune of luck, I would say, or maybe somebody was really doing a whole lot to save money and they saw what was coming and then they were able to pass down. And then some people did have things passed down to them and they succumb to substance abuse. That's not going to always be the same story for everybody because everybody's life is not the same. And what their experiences or set of experiences is not going to be the same as well. So you have to think realistically that it's not only that we see it as a trap, but sometimes those programs might be needed for people who are in a situation where they do need something to get them on their feet until they're able to temporarily get out of a situation. They might need to be on SNAP program. They might need to be in Section 8 living. They maybe they're working on those programs too. You also have to realize people are not everyone is just sitting on the programs and not working. Some of the people are working, but they're working low wage jobs that don't pay six figures. They don't pay the same amount of money that some of these people are saying that, oh, it's a trap, because they may not have the same skill set. So you have to dive deeper in the situation because everybody doesn't work in Silicon Valley. They're not tech experts and they don't have those type of skills. They may not have went to 4-year institution of college. They might have went to trade school and then whatever they learned back in the 80s and 90s, maybe those jobs are obsolete and they no longer have the skill set that that the people you see now in this generation do possess. And so you have to look at it from not a narrow point of view but a wider point of view. And then people are coming from different countries. You don't know what their skill sets are and what their learning and training was back in the 80s and 90s, and maybe a lot of that could have been labor jobs. It's the same here in the U.S. Some people maybe were taught to be hairdressers, they were taught to be mechanics, they were taught to learn the basics of survival in terms of the academic world to have at least hold down a respectable job. But what were those jobs back then? So we have to also peel back the layers of that, and I don't think people have really focused on that. So I'm going to type in here no, I know that doesn't sound good the way I typed it. Trump to cut aid for the poor, but that is what brings up the article, and it's basically the truth. White House eyes overhaul of federal housing aid to the poor. So I was trying to find another article because I believe, when you read a lot of articles such as I do, and maybe there's others that do that. I read a lot of political articles. They start asking you to like subscribe to the articles and send money, and then they start blurring the article so you can't read the entirety of the article. But I know where this is coming from. Let me stop and digress and say we knew this was coming down the pike, those of us who are really in tune with what's going on in the world of politics. Unfortunately, we knew this was coming. So, it's not a good thing, I can tell you that. Okay, also there are nations, poor nations. You see the articles from the titles here, and it's really sad because we are here. Trump isn't waging a war on poverty, he's waging a war on, it's probably going to be something to that effect of what I was saying. It's more towards people that are poor. I already kind of could fill in the gaps. So, I don't know if this article goes deep in specifics of what's going on, but it may go into some of it. Yeah, it looks like it does kind of touch on or hint on. So I'll go into this article. So it says the fight of disinformation. Sign up. Okay, so this is an article here. It says this week that President Donald Trump, he released a 4.8 trillion budget proposal that would further decimate the already weakened social safety net. So Trump's plan would make steep cuts to food stamps, Medicaid, housing assistance, and other welfare programs that millions of Americans rely on. So this definitely touches on what I was discussing earlier. But the budget is merely a wish list with no chance of passing the Democratic-controlled House. So that's what they're hoping for, that there can be a stop put to it, because it's going to create. We think we see homelessness now. Homelessness ain't nothing compared to what we're going to see if this proposal passes. So, more quietly, Trump has already rolled out a series of bureaucratic changes that have begun to take a tangible toll on the country's most vulnerable populations and will only inflict more damage in the coming years. So the once robust social safety net has been steadily dismantled by the Republican and Democratic administrations alike as well. So let's get into that, because some people say that they're annoyed with both sides, So we've heard, at my work, some of my colleagues, they discuss they touch on some of the things that maybe people in the neighborhood and communities have discussed that has been bothering them about the way they handle the business of the White House and politics that go thereof. So a series of actions from Ronald Reagan's fear-mongering about the government's subsidizing luxurious lifestyles for welfare recipients to Bill Clinton's welfare reform that imposed strict work requirements for benefit recipients, which I believe that's still happening. That's what I was saying, that people in public housing, you have to work. As I recall, there are people I know that have jobs and they get Section 8, and they base it based on your income. And if they don't make a whole lot of money, they adjust it to where they can help them with their rent, and they also will allow for them to be engaged in their work Monday to Friday or whatever type of work or profession, occupation that they have. So it says the reform that imposed strict work requirements for benefit recipients have made it tougher than ever to be poor in America, and now Trump is making it even harder. So there's been an emphasis on attacking the most vulnerable people in our nation. This is said by an Alexandra Cawthorn Gaines, Vice President of the Poverty to Prosperity Program, that at the center of American progress, it's just continuous attacks and the creation of additional barriers for people seeking assistance. So here are the programs that have taken the biggest hit as a result of the administration's war, as they call it, war on the poor, war, not war on poverty, but war on the poor, the sick, and the elderly as well. Food stamps. So Mr. Smith, a 45-year-old man living in Washington, D.C., he scraps together what passes for a living selling a local newspaper as a street vendor, so for which he earns $20 a day on a good day. And each month he receives $194 from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistant Program, which is better known as SNAP, or Food Stamp Program. Free meals at various churches and nonprofits are essential to bolster the food supply he is able to purchase. So when he gets his benefits at the beginning of the month, he buys groceries in bulk, either foods he can store in the freezer or those with a long shelf life. So you have to budget, he says. So you have to rely on being frugal. So you have to get 3 meals a day on $6 and $7. And so he's trying to be frugal, which many people are doing, and we're going to see a lot more of that. And it won't even just be frugal, it'll be trying to survive. So on April 1st, he will stop receiving his monthly infusion of funds, and that is because a new Trump administration rule that will cause approximately 700,000 people across the country to be kicked off of SNAP rolls. So SNAP, which is administered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, feeds more than 40 million Americans each year. The food stamps are vital for low-income people and families that they serve as economic drivers across the country, providing customers and revenue for small grocers. As a part of the Clinton welfare reform, able-bodied adults between the age of 18 and 50 with no dependents were limited to 3 months of assistance before they had to prove that they were working at least 20 hours a week. So at that point, their benefits would lapse and they would have to meet a certain requirement in order to become eligible all over again. So in the past, governors, states with high unemployment rates could request waivers from the rule, and many able-bodied recipients were able to continue receiving those benefits despite, the limits. So now the Trump administration's new rule will tighten the requirement and the waivers, making it close to impossible for states to request them. So as a result, hundreds and thousands of people will lose the SNAP benefits eligibility and have to find new ways to make ends meet. Without food stamps or SNAP program, Mr. Smith isn't sure how he'll eat. And he knows that hunger is he knows what hunger is already like, so he's been through it. Sounds like he's familiar with it, and there's others that are as well. So you're in a survival mode instead of productive mode, he says, of his time with SNAP benefits, and you're walking around like a bear foraging for food. But even given SNAP limitations, the 3 months of being able to eat is a lifesaver. So that's what I was discussing earlier, that some people say, oh, those programs are a trap. Well, look at this man's situation, and you gotta also look at the generations and what their skill sets are and what kind of jobs they were taught what a set of experiences they had and what they were able to do, and if they went to college or if they had a trade, and what did they teach back then in the 80s and 90s that now everybody's into tech. They weren't teaching some of these things back then. You got people that are in their 70s, 60s, late 60s and 70s that are just learning how to use a cell phone, or just learning how to navigate on a cell phone. So that tells you the changing times, and also the skill sets of the changing time as well play a part in that. So the concept of supporting poor Americans with cash assistance, first established in 1935 as part of the New Deal. So when the Great Depression sent 15 million Americans into poverty over a subsequent of decades, welfare became the top target of Republican mockery, culminating in President Ronald Reagan ridicule of so-called welfare queens. We know who he was referring to, living large on taxpayer dime. So after the Clinton welfare, basically the reform overhauled the program in 1996. So it says there was ridicule of a so-called welfare queen living large. So I wanted you to see that again, because he referred to black women as being welfare queens. This was in the Ronald Reagan years. And Clinton, he had this overhaul as well, but the program in 1996, and it imposed work requirements. So you had to work if you wanted to get on those programs. You had to have work. What was once welfare became known as temporary assistance for needy families. Then the title had changed, and they, do that ever so often. So today, 22 of every 100 U.S. families living in poverty receive cash aid, down from 68 in 1996. So it ends up being families who are really, really desperate and don't have any other options. They usually end up on the programs and they need them, says LaDonna Pavitt of the Center on Budget and Policy and Priorities. For instance, a single woman with 2 children living in South Carolina collecting what is called TANF benefits receives $292 each month in cash assistance. That doesn't cover even a third of the state's average rent for a 2-bedroom home, which is $898. So even in the state with more generous benefits like New Hampshire, where the same family would get $1,066, it doesn't cover the rent average of a 2-bedroom unit. And no one is getting wealthy on TANF, says CAPS. California gains in most states. Families that qualify for the TANF are automatically eligible for SNAP, but the Trump administration plans to sever the relationship through a federal rule to close what is called a loophole. So a press release justifying the proposed rule, offering their own version of Reagan's welfare queen trope. The Trump administration claimed that people who don't need welfare are still claiming it. So the proposed rule would fix the loophole that had expanded SNAP recipients in some states include people who receive assistance when they clearly don't need it. So in fact, the depth of this specific flexibility has become so egregious that the millionaire living in Minnesota successfully enrolled in a program simply to highlight the waste of taxpayer money. The Trump administration brags that closing this loophole will save taxpayer money, but now instead of having a streamlined process of TANF and SNAP, families living in poverty will face more difficulties assessing the funds that they need to survive. Now, housing assistance programs. More than 10 million people in 5.2 million households use government assistance in order to afford housing. 2/3 of the recipients are seniors, children, or people with disabilities. So most of them receive housing choice vouchers funded by the Department of Housing and Urban Development and administered by local housing authorities. The but demand for the vouchers has far exceeded supply. Wait lists for vouchers in some cities are years long. Under the Clinton era policy, families with mixed immigration status were able to access public housing so long as at least one member of the family was eligible. So federal subsidies covering only the U.S. citizens or unauthorized immigrants. These are authorized immigrants, but undocumented family members were not barred from living there. So you could live there, you might not be on it if you were a person that was an immigrant that was undocumented. So they weren't really on the programs as people would think. They didn't give them housing benefits. They gave them the benefit of living with a family member that had housing benefits, is what it's saying. So it says the Trump administration proposed a new rule that it claims would shorten wait lists by requiring every member a voucher holding household to be a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident. The rule could leave more than 50,000 children homeless without actually shortening the wait list. The administration their own analysis found that the rule would affect 76,000 people, including 55,000 children in mixed status families who are living in public housing, and result in some mixed status families becoming homeless. So we're about to see homelessness like no other. It's going to skyrocket if this goes through. So, and as we reported last May, this is why it wouldn't have the intended effect of shortening a wait list. The subsidy for mixed status families are prorated so that they are only to cover the eligible member of the household. So because of this, the families are paying higher rents than households with occupants who are all American citizens or are legal residents. So with the proposed rules, housing costs would increase substantially because entire families would be eligible for subsidized rent. As HUD says in its analysis, the agency would be forced to reduce the quality and quantity of housing to make up for the rising costs. So Medicaid, in 2016 campaign, Donald Trump promised not to touch Medicaid, which proves health insurance to more than 64 million low-income Americans. That hasn't stopped the administration from launching an all-out assault on the program and its beneficiaries. So for the many Americans, the program's seemingly never-ending forms, difficult documentation requirements, and the practice of kicking recipients off their insurance for minor month-to-month changes in the income makes getting and keeping Medicaid, even without the administration interference, a nearly insurmountable hurdle. Now the Trump administration is looking to make the process even more complicated. In a warning shot fired in 2017, the administration amended the rules related to the Section 1115 waivers that allowed states to apply to experiment with their Medicaid programs outside of federal guidelines. The change allowed states to apply the waivers that did not make increasing coverage of a goal of the changes to the state program, as opposed to previous years when increasing coverage had to be part of the objective of the change. So the next year, it issued new guidance allowing states to demand work requirements for assessing Medicaid. So you had to be in a work situation to even assess Medicaid as part of a Section 1115 waiver. Finally, in the most recent and potentially most devastating blow to Medicaid, the administration proposed changing the program to block the grants that come in. Currently, in the state, That expanded Medicaid. For every dollar a state spends on their Medicaid program, the federal government contributes 90 cents. So in states that did not expand Medicaid, the funds that the federal government matches varies under a block grant system, a fixed amount of money that would be made available to the states, but the federal government would make no adjustments to changing needs in the states. So the rising cost burden of Medicaid would shift entirely to states, which would have a strong incentive to cut coverage and benefits to prevent spending from the spiraling. So pretty much I believe there's more in this article, and it goes into social security income and disability benefits. So experts, before we get to that, they warn a block grant system would devastate Medicaid by limiting funding. Doreen Mason of the National Women's Law Center says that the proposal were to go forward. Previous data suggests that the Medicaid funding could be cut by $1 trillion over the next 10 years, decimating coverage for vulnerable populations. And we know who those people could possibly be. Elderly, people of color, lots of people, many people, probably millions. So supplemental, which is called Social Security income for the disabled and disability benefits. Last month, the Trump administration, he has left no stone untouched. I will say that, I'm adding that in there. They have proposed a change that experts believe will deprive thousands of Americans of disability benefits, with children, elderly, and with complicated medical cases bearing the brunt. Created in 1972, supplemental Social Security income provides monthly cash assistance to low-income Americans who are disabled or elderly. The majority of the more 8 million recipients of SSI are eligible due to a severe disability or typically have no other source of income. More than 1 million children also receive SSI benefits to help their guardians pay for large medical bills, time off of work to provide care, or other expenses. For years, conservative lawmakers have attacked SSI benefits, claiming that it is easy to pretend to be disabled. Some have questioned whether many children who receive SSI are being forced to fake disabilities by the parents. However, signing up for disability benefits is an arduous process in which recipients who may already face extra difficulties in filling out the paperwork and making doctor's appointments are forced to document their entire medical and financial history. So 2/3 of the applicants of SSI are rejected, and even those who are ultimately approved to spend years waiting for that income, they have ever received a penny. They've ever received a penny from the government at all. So the majority of SSI recipients receive assistance of less than $600 a month. So since many people with SSI have disabilities that prevent them from working, now this is where we get into those people who claim that all these programs are a trap. You gotta look at the situations that are different. Everybody is not from a 6-year, 4-year institution, has college in the background, and they can go ahead and get out these 6-figure jobs, or they can work these reputable jobs where they're able-bodied. They might be mentally disabled. They might have health issues that prevent them from having or securing those type of occupations. So when that comes into play, these programs are their lifeline. So you have to think logically. You can't think in the box. You got to think outside of the box and look at everybody's situation as a case-by-case situation. Everybody isn't able to go and fill out an application and get their resume in order and have all these references and have a stellar work history and be able to go out and foot the work of getting these occupations and being able to just pay their bills straight from where their workplace is. Some people might have barriers that prevent them from doing it, and this is such the case. So since many people, back to the article, the ones that have SSI with disabilities that prevent them from working, even with their benefits, more than 2/5 of SSI recipients live below the poverty line. So this year, conservatives may finally get their wish, since the Trump administration is in office announced changes in December to a process known as continuing disability review. Currently, there are 3 categories: the review that indicates how often an SSI recipient disability status will be recertified. So medical improvement not expected, medical improvement expected, and medical improvement possible. So think about that, guys. They might force people off these programs, or they might cut them entirely based on these decisions. So the administration is creating a 4th category, which is called medical improvement likely. It will compromise people with complex cases, such as those with disabilities that don't fit into the designated category. People over the age of 55, people have children the age of 6 to 12, and require them to resubmit their full medical history every 2 years. And many people in this new category are expected to lose benefits simply because they will be unable to keep up with all the documentation that is required thereof. So Catherine Rom, of the expert of SSI, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, estimates that the new rule could affect hundreds of thousands of disability beneficiaries for recipients whose Medicaid is connected to the SSI status. Even temporary gaps in coverage could also affect people that could put their lives at risk, targeting children age 6 to 12, and it could be a deliberate thing, argues Matthew Cortland, a disabled, chronically ill attorney and policy expert, because that's when children start to use more resources. And so, I believe it goes on to say that in the end, Portland worries that the administration's assault on food stamps, Medicaid housing program, and disability benefits will combine to make it harder for poor Americans to make ends meet. And so if you were to try to design a policy, an agenda that had the goal of killing the poorest and the most vulnerable Americans, he said in a statement, I don't know that I could come up with a more effective agenda than what the Trump administration has done over the last 3 years. So that's pretty much the article, and I know it's long, it was lengthy, but I felt it was important to mention it because I don't think people really realize what's about to happen. Some of us see what's going on, some of us know what's going on, and those of us don't really realize what's about to happen. We don't understand what's going on. We think we know, but we don't really know because it hasn't hit all of us yet. It hasn't hit people hard yet. And sometimes, unfortunately, people have to learn the hard way what their decision or poor choices are. And some people voted for this man thinking because he's a businessman, or we don't want a woman in office, or Kamala's not black, all the excuses that I've heard, or Kamala, she killed that man, she put black men in prison. Well, I'll tell you what, she's the lesser, if you want to say the lesser of two evils, compared to what this man is about to do and what he's already done thus far. Him and Elon, who has co-opted himself as president, he's puppeting, or at least now he's trying to pull away because his businesses are being heavily affected with this Doge people that he's put in place. But from what I've heard, Trump has met with the Venezuelan president, and they're trying to get together a plan so that they can create more prisons. And then with those prisons, that's a whole nother institution that they make money from the you know, the correctional facilities and the institutions that house prisoners. That's also a complex situation, and it is the prison complex, and they make money from that. And if they want to build more prisons, what I've been hearing is Trump is looking at possibly sending some of the people of color, which are here, over to the Venezuelan prisons. And the new prisons that they want to build, they want to fill those. And we know what people they want to put in there. It's just, to me, the way I'm looking at it is a new version of a continuation of new enslavement. And they get those prisoners to work and make money, pennies on the dollar, and maybe not money at all. It's no money, just a few cents, and they can do the work that all these other people were doing, and they don't have to pay them a whole lot, is what I'm seeing could possibly be coming down the road. And all these people who voted for him thinking that Kamala did all this stuff to black men, well, guess what? You got this one in office. He wants to do a lot more damage. And the way this is going, he might just do it. And so I don't think people realize what they just put in office. And we haven't seen the hardest of times yet, but we're about to. And those that voted for him are going to regret those votes severely. I mean severely.